So when you look at this kind of view of the Psalms, what do you think that the Christian can take from this knowledge of the structure of the Psalms, of the change of the covenant, uh, rather than just reading them as simple one song after another?
Sure. I mean, I think it's interesting that you can look at the progression of the Psalms, but I think there's kind of a little bit of a natural progression in our own lives where, we become believers and then, we think we're going to change the world in the here and now. And I'm not saying we don't change the world in some ways and stuff like this, but I think sometimes we get caught up in thinking that everything will be accomplished on this planet here and now. And we can get a little bit disheartened, disillusioned, and discouraged. And we need the reminder that, we are citizens of another realm, and you know, the ultimate accomplishment and joy in the presence of God occurs in heaven.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I find really fascinating is looking through the progression of themes from the first book of the Psalms to the fifth is that there really is, it begins with this hope that the king, the earthly king, is going to be able to keep the law where we failed to do that. And there really is this emphasis on obedience and doing. And by the time you get to the end of the Psalms, there really is a focus on the goodness of God and the faithfulness of God and God's ability to save us. And I think that one of the things that I've seen in my own life as a Christian is there has been a change of emphasis in my own life from I need to do this, I need to do that, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, to just being able to take joy in the faithfulness of God. And I'm not saying that doesn't mean you do anything, but I think that when the Bible talks about the joy of the Lord being our strength, that really the doing comes from the joy of worshiping God who saves us, not before. I think that if you try to put the doing first, that's a catastrophe.
It's drudgery.
Yeah, it really is. And growing up in some of the churches that I grew up in, and just seeing there was a lot of drudgery that went on, and if you think that you or somebody else is going to be able to fix all these things, then and you better get to it. Boy, that's a recipe, it seems to me, for disillusionment and disaster. As far as looking at the failure of human kings, what should we as Christians take from that? Because obviously, you could say, well, that means don't be involved in the political system, or you could say somebody might criticize this view of Scripture and say, well, you're basically saying that Christians shouldn't, because we shouldn't put our hope in the political process, that we're advocating not being involved in the political process at all. So how do we as Christians navigate that? Easy question.
Yeah. Obviously, a few lessons ago, we talked about the value of leadership, for the and the value of the role leaders play in the hierarchy that God has created and things of this sort. And so to then go and say, well, for the world leaders, that doesn't apply, but obviously as Christians, we're called to pray for our leaders, whether they're, serving in the image of God or not. We're called to pray for them and to intercede for them. To say that, in some way, shape, or form, we're not supposed to participate in the political process. I don't know if there's a natural progression to that from this at all. But I think it also is just supposed to temper our expectations a little bit of what we should expect, earthly kings and leaders to accomplish, and the roles that they play. And, I think we talked a couple lessons ago about, whether you believe in God or not, as a king, you might be serving God's purposes or not serving his purposes. And you might, in some instances, align yourself with what God's accomplishing in the world, in some cases not. But I don't think that means we should be definitely not abstaining from politics at all, but I think we should definitely temper our expectations of what it might accomplish.
Yeah, and I think that we should be quick to understand that where things really get changed is in the hearts of people. And One of the things that's very interesting is that we pursue as human beings, we pursue power, right? The Lord of the Rings is kind of coming back in the news because Amazon is putting out a new Lord of the Rings series soon. And there's a lot in the Lord of the Rings about how human beings, men, pursue power above all else. And I think one of the things that's fascinating to me is that the Bible's very clear about the limitations of that. That power is kind of, in some ways, there's an illusion to power. How do you see that playing out in our modern world? Do you see any examples of that going on?
Sure. I mean, obviously, and I don't know if we're supposed to draw some difference between, say, a monarchy and a democracy or anything like that. But if you look at democracies and you look at those who rise to the top of any given democracy, but they're still subservient to oftentimes the wishes and desires of the people, and you'll find that their actions will often try to align themselves with the majority and things of this sort. And that doesn't scream I have absolute power. I can do anything I want. That screams I'm still, subservient in some way, shape, or form. But it also means that they can't really. They're limited in what they can really accomplish in this world.
Yeah. One of the things that I find fascinating is when I was growing up, we had one of the movies that I remember as a teenager that made a big impression on me was the movie Red Dawn. There was the Russians came and they invaded and they were taking over and it was the Soviet Union. They're so powerful. They're going to take over our country without firing a shot, or they're going to come in and invade. But there was this huge the Soviet Union and communism in general was this leviathan that was just so powerful that you can't hope to stand up to it. And then it wasn't but 5-6 years later that we were reading about and watching on TV the Berlin Wall coming down, the collapse of the Soviet Union. What looked so powerful and so strong was incredibly fragile. Is there any, and obviously this comes from the Psalms and the idea of the hearts of men versus external power and what we can expect from either one. Is there any kind of lesson that we can learn as Christians about our own personal lives from what the Psalms are telling us and also what we've seen in history?
Oh, absolutely. One of the Psalms, and it might be Psalm 37, it just starts off saying, "Do not fret." When you see, and talks about the evildoer prospering in his ways and things of his sort, and same kind of thing. When you see, some nation prospering that maybe we would describe as being not so desirable, maybe even evil, or at least evil intentioned in certain ways or something, don't fret. For those nations that are operating in opposition to God, they're not long for this world. There's just something about the way God has set up the world, and when you follow His law, whether it is an individual or a nation, you follow His law and cooperate with His law, things tend to go well on average. And when you don't, you may have, you may have your day, but you might only just have your day.
Yeah, and I think that as human beings, as individuals, we're just as tempted as rulers are. We're kind of kings in our own realm, and I think we're just as tempted as any president or dictator to use force and coercion as tools rather than to lead people to following goodness with joy. So whether or not we're looking at how am I going to evangelize my neighbor, or how am I going to help my son to deal with the struggles that he's having, or how am I going to make my family something that is something glorious. It's always better to lead people to discover the joy of obedience than to try to force them into it.